So a little bit of an intro. Jabez, I think, very well known in the industry. Structure Research has become, or has been for a very long time, one of the leading providers of information into the market, consulting services, tracking different markets, and one of the leaders in APAC around very, very early entrant before data centers were the talk of the town. So you guys have been here for a very long time and very well respected. So today, I think really good opportunity to talk a little bit about the market in APAC and Japan more specifically, what you're seeing. You guys track this market quite closely and quite engaged with all the participants. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, no, happy to, Dan. Happy to share some insights that we're seeing in Japan.
So I guess first thing that'd be good to chat about a little bit is, we're obviously seeing very substantial demand in the US, kind of a step change in requirements, gigascale level campuses, primarily in response to AI. I'm curious to get your thoughts on APAC, right? What is the conversation around? Is that coming to APAC? Is it coming in the same way? Is it coming differently? Would love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think because of the nascent stage of AI that we are in currently, a lot of the large scale frontier training models are, and the infrastructure associated with training these large language models are situated in the home countries of these hyperscale companies. So OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic, those guys are training their models in the US primarily. But I think eventually you'll see that there'll be a lot more inference nodes being deployed across the world, and APAC is definitely going to be a beneficiary once these models get to a certain level of maturity, and they need to be deployed to end users for low latency access, for high performance, for inferencing. So I think that's going to drive a lot of demand coming into the region over time as the AI wave really starts to mature across the global stage.
And do you see, so you talk a little bit about inference. Do you not see large scale training like we're seeing in the US coming to APAC, and countries wanting to have data sovereignty topics, or wanting to keep the data within their home countries, not relying solely on the US for that?
I think what we're seeing today, and this could change in the next 6 to 12 months, but what we're seeing is that a lot of the countries in APAC will eventually adopt and develop their own sovereign AI models just for national security reasons. But it seems like the pathway to do that is by leveraging of open source models like Llama, like DeepSeek, that are able to have similar performance levels and benchmark performance levels as with the top tier closed models like the OpenAI GPT models. So I do think that you may not see large scale training like you're seeing in the US, like in China, in markets in APAC. But what you're going to see is there will be training clusters deployed to train these sovereign AI models. So it'll be leveraging off open source tools. It'll be a lot of fine tuning and catering specifically to the country's business practices, culture, language, and that's going to reside in country. That hasn't materialized at scale yet, but it's definitely headed in that direction. And you're seeing big investments and big bets being made in markets like Japan and India and Australia, catering to that type of dynamic. But for now, I think people also forget that a lot of what's driving demand in markets like Japan is really just cloud infrastructure. Japan is a very nascent. Japan was probably one of the later markets to adopt the public cloud platforms at a larger scale. Because of a relatively conservative business culture, a little bit of hesitancy to adopt foreign infrastructure platforms when they were so used to deploying their IT infrastructure with local system integrators that really helped them through that IT journey. And so now that the public cloud is here to stay and the Japanese companies are embracing it more so than before, you're seeing this huge surge in demand and adoption in Japan that's driving a lot of growth there.
Gotcha. And then I guess last question on this: when you talk about inference, how do you expect this to play out from an actual requirements perspective? Are we talking about still a need for larger scale campuses, or we're talking about sticking to the extent possible to that traditional cloud availability zone structure that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, I think the architecture will likely evolve over time. It's hard to say exactly what it will be like today, but from what we know and what we've seen play out to date, I think a lot of the AI infrastructure that is being deployed in markets like Japan are being situated adjacent to current cloud availability zones because the network architecture is already established and present, and so they don't have to completely procure new network routes or have to build new fiber pathways into new locations. And so I think the easy way to get your AI infrastructure speed to market, get it accessible by your end users is by deploying it currently in tandem with your cloud infrastructure footprint. And so what you're seeing in Japan is, basically an extension of what's happening with cloud, which is, AI being deployed alongside cloud infrastructure.
Super interesting. And then when we talk about Japan, we've seen a little bit about some interesting news. I guess two that I've been hearing a lot from the market are the new Chip Restrictions Act out of the U.S., which classified Japan as one of the top tier markets that has essentially unlimited, no restrictions on exports and use of AI chips technology. Do you see that as a driving force of the interest in Japan at a regional level beyond what we've seen before?
Yeah, I think so. I think that definitely is a tailwind for markets like Japan and Australia, those markets that are put on the tier one list when it comes to the U.S. government's AI diffusion framework policy that you were referencing earlier, Dan. So I just think that definitely helps, make data center development activity and also hyperscale decision making when it comes to which markets they want to bet on for larger footprints or larger capacity footprints. I think Japan makes a lot of sense from that standpoint, and also because it's a very strategic market and a gateway for a lot of U.S. traffic that's coming from the U.S. West Coast. A lot of the submarine cables first land in Japan and make their way to the rest of APAC via Tokyo. So I do think that really helps Japan cement itself as sort of a gateway market for a lot of internet traffic coming from the US.
Very interesting. So I guess maybe we talk a little bit about Japan itself now, and we've seen a lot of recent announcements both on the demand side and the supply side. Curious to traditionally in Japan, the big region was Tokyo. Osaka for a long time had a lot of promise, but I think moved a little slower than what some people expected. But you've seen a lot of activity recently in Osaka. How are you seeing those two markets evolve? And if you could talk a little bit about the recent large announcements that we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think Tokyo has always been the initial focal point for a lot of hyperscale platforms when they look to land in a market like Japan. And they've definitely invested heavily into the Tokyo market. They've grown their footprints quite considerably through a mixture of self-builds, built-to-suits with real estate developers, with co-location leases. So they've gone to market in several ways to address their capacity needs in Tokyo. I think the growth in Osaka is a natural evolution of hyperscale activity in a very large country like Japan. You're seeing similar dynamic in Australia as well, with the Sydney, Melbourne markets showing similar traits to a Tokyo, Osaka. So I think Osaka has benefited from its central geographical location in Japan, where you can serve two of the larger business hubs in Kyoto and Osaka via that single central point. And it being located centrally in Japan also gives it the potential to serve other more rural markets that may not have the same level of end user base that a market like Tokyo has, since it's heavily populated. I think 1/3 of the Japanese population is living in that greater Tokyo area. So that's a natural initial landing point for hyperscale. But as you can imagine, the hyperscalers have also announced Osaka as a separate cloud region for them. So they do see it as a very strategic location in Japan, and they are likely, you know, because of the constraints that are present in Tokyo from power infrastructure availability, cost to build, all of that, I think that has driven their focus to a market like Osaka that maybe doesn't have the same level of intensity when it comes to these constraints, but still a very strategic market that they need to invest heavily in the long term.
Gotcha. And then, when we talk about a market like Tokyo, what we've seen is you have the traditional AZs, Inzai, West Tokyo, Central Tokyo, South Tokyo, but you're starting to see some new interesting announcements. The big project in Tsukuba by Goodman, the recent announcements from NTT and Tochigi. What are those use cases? Is that basically will be new AZs for that region? Are we talking about different use cases? Do you expect that to evolve? What's driving those projects?
Yeah, I think it's a natural evolution of their availability zone architecture because once you fully max out the available amount of capacity you can deploy in an availability zone, you have to find alternative ways to address those capacity requirements. And so many people that are familiar with the Tokyo market fully understand that the Inzai area, which is a very dense cluster of data centers and catering to quite a few hyperscale availability zone requirements, have reached constraints. There's not much capacity left today. And so they need to basically find another location to cater for their East Tokyo region. And Tsukuba, is a location that seems to fit the bill, given that it is still fairly proximate to both Inzai and to Central Tokyo, and it gives them the large amount of scale that they wouldn't have been able to get in a market like Inzai today, in a cluster like Inzai today. So I think those types of developments are natural extensions of availability zones, and you're seeing also connectivity data centers start to materialize in these AZs, where typically a lot of the AZs used to tether back into the CBD locations where a lot of the care hotels are located, but that's evolving as well.
Very interesting. One last question on this one. Structure, I think, has become the go-to in tracking pricing and leasing activity, right? And have a really good pulse on this market. I think most people in the industry track your guys' annual reports. What are you seeing from a leasing pricing perspective in the market?
Yeah, I think the Japanese market has historically enjoyed some pretty low pricing for hyperscale. I think partially due to the currency, the foreign exchange rates. But I think given that a lot of the cost to build that we're seeing today, when speaking to operators and developers, have gone up considerably. Inflation has played a piece, cost of raw materials, and also for Japan uniquely, the availability of general contractors, or at least the tier one general contractors, are tough to get as well, because there's only a handful of them, and there's a lot of data center development that needs to happen. And so I think those constraints, coupled with labor shortages, new labor laws, really created this perfect storm of just increased cost to build. And therefore, I think over time, the Japan or the Tokyo market, the pricing for that market will naturally have to increase to accommodate for the inputs into data center development costs. So I think that's going to be a natural evolution for that market, and I think we're seeing that play out already today.
Interesting. I guess last topic we were talking, you went a little bit into this, the key challenges in the market. I know for a long time people talked about time to power constraints, right? Which we were seeing some timelines of 5 to 10 years in the existing markets. And I feel like in my conversations with a lot of people in the market, it seems like really the GC topic has come up over and over again. How, obviously the general contractor part, what do you see on the power side? Is that still a big concern? Is that is that alleviated somewhat from spending a little more time in Osaka or going into some of these new areas that weren't available before?
Yeah, I think you're seeing, a branching out of the traditional clusters because of these power availability constraints, and so that's why the Goodman campus in Tsukuba has got some legs to it. You're seeing some activity in the north of Tokyo as well, with certain new developments in play there. So usually, historically, most of the deployments happen in central, east, and west of Tokyo, but you're seeing, people explore alternative locations that are still proximate to the central Tokyo area that do have power availability, and also that's why you're also seeing growth in Osaka because of that same issue. So I do think that there could be a possibility of alternative hubs outside of Tokyo, maybe at a midpoint between Tokyo and Osaka that does have more power availability to cater for these large scale developments. So that may happen over time, but for now, we're still seeing a considerable amount of focus on Tokyo and Osaka.
Very interesting. Perfect. I guess before we wrap up, any last points, or a lot of people are paying a lot of attention to this market. I think more broadly, there's been a huge investment interest in Japan. Do you have any advice or thoughts or things to point out about the market that we haven't talked about today?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think, seeing what you guys are putting together at Digital Garden is going to be a much needed forum for the market to understand and be on the same page, frankly, because we get a lot of questions about the market, and people asking us about power availability issues, constraints, GCs, labor shortages, pricing, hyperscale demand, all of that stuff. And I think people there's not been a marquee event. I think there's maybe one or two local events, but I think you guys bring a very unique set of executives, both on the government side, on the industry side, and the hyperscale side, all in one place. So I think that's going to be a very helpful forum to exchange ideas and to make sure everyone's on the same page, because I think everyone wants to see the Japan market flourish and be a sustainable market when it comes to data center development. So yeah, we'd be interested to hear your take then on how what was the genesis and the thesis for this event, and what's been the latest update today.
Oh, good question. I think as you very well know, we've worked together in the past. I spent the past 3 years here trying to build out a new hub for Japan. And I think what we saw that was very interesting is obviously was interacting with the global community in the digital infrastructure space, and everyone was extremely keen to engage with Japan. How can we do more in Japan? But at the same time, Japan's very difficult, very hard. Some people had some tough experiences in trying to access the market, getting sites, some of the joint ventures, some cultural challenges that exist with those collaborations. And so there was a huge interest in this market, but there was, as you mentioned, a little bit of hesitancy and a little bit of opacity that comes with it. On the other side, what was interesting is as we were engaging more and more in Japan, we saw that the Japanese players really want to do more in the space, both on the government side and on the private side. So, and on the government at all levels, right? So starting from the national level with MEDI, MIC, MLIT, the digital agency, all the ministries that oversee this really pushing hard, which is a huge force in Japan for change. And then you also saw the government side all the way down to the regional level, the local level. Hey, how can we attract more investment to our cities and our regions? And then on the private side as well, right? A lot of the large real estate players in Japan, the mid-sized real estate players saying, hey, how can we get involved in this? How can we do more here? And so it felt like there was a real need to bring everyone together. And so we really, out of a mission we think this is an amazing market. We have a huge belief in it for a variety of reasons. And as you mentioned, it was really a forum to bring a global scale event and all the real decision makers to not make it just, and there is a part of it which is around learning and information, but it's really focused around deals and having similar to what you see at a PTC or what you see at a data cloud, where people go to do business and go to do deals and go to collaborate. And that's what we're trying to accomplish Digital Garden. And it's honestly been fantastic. I think the first step was enormous support from the government, right? And having, we have Nishimura-san, the former head of MEDI, as the keynote speaker, and was kind of one of the first people to come in. And then seeing all the different ministries come in and say, hey, we'll send someone, we'll send people, we'll send speakers, and we want to be engaged in this conversation. And then the ecosystem really embracing it, right? So you saw really a lot of the top operators come in and say, hey, we'll back this, we'll come, we'll send our most senior people there. And so it's been really fun, honestly, to see the ecosystem engage. In Japan, sometimes you see, first time events or first time anything is sometimes taken with a little bit of hesitancy. And surprisingly, you haven't seen that here. We've seen also a lot of support from the domestic large Japanese companies, which has been great. And we're also extremely happy to have Structure Research as one of our strategic partners. I think you guys are not only in Japan, but globally recognized as an incredible influencer and consultant and information provider to the market. And people really trust you guys on a global scale level. So it's really great to have you guys as a partner.
Yeah, we're happy to do it. We'll wish you guys all the best for your event. And hopefully it'll be an event that people look forward to every year from now on.
Just following your lead, Jabez. Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, guys, check out Digital Garden March 17th, right? To 18th. Is that the dates?
17th, 18th, correct.